We were sent to a remote base in Alaska, a place that had gone silent, abandoned, forgotten. They said it was just another black site operation, nothing more than a routine recon. But what we found there wasn't supposed to exist. It wasn't supposed to be seen by human eyes. Our orders were simple, but nothing about that night was normal. Nothing. I am Sergeant First Class Jackson, stationed with a Special Operations Unit, Task Force Echo, 3rd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment. It was 2014, somewhere deep in the Alaskan wilderness, well beyond where the civilian satellites go. If you've ever been to a briefing for a Black Ops mission, you know the drill. Briefing rooms always feel cold, sterile. This one was no different. Dim lights, a projector screen flickering with classified intel, and a handful of officers in suits who wouldn't meet your eye. We were told this was just another recon mission. Routine, they said. They'd been trying to get in touch with an abandoned military research facility for weeks. The communications had gone dead, and the site was supposedly abandoned. No threat, no intel worth gathering. But I knew better. The way they looked at us, the way they delivered the orders without much context. Something felt wrong, but we didn't question it. They didn't give us that luxury. The operation was called Blue Mist, a name that even now gives me chills. We were to insert at a remote location a few miles from the site, establish a perimeter and gather intel on whatever had caused the radio silence. Our primary objective was clear: find out what had happened, then extract. It seemed simple enough. The gear we were issued was standard M4 carbines, M9 pistols, tactical radios, GPS trackers, and a set of thermal optics. Nothing out of the ordinary for a recon mission. But as the briefing went on, I noticed something I didn't think much of at the time. There was a strange shift in the room. The commanding officer spoke of the mission as if it were nothing more than routine, but there was something in his voice that made my skin crawl. It was subtle, too subtle, but it was there. And then, the oddest thing happened. One of the interpreters, a civilian contractor we were told was there to help with any language barriers, pulled me aside. He was nervous, glancing over his shoulder like he didn't want anyone to hear. He said something to me that I'll never forget. He told me, "Don't go to that place. If they send you there, you won't come back the same." I asked him what he meant, but he wouldn't say another word, just left, like he was never there. The rest of the team shrugged it off. We were soldiers, we followed orders. But that warning, it stuck with me. And it wouldn't be the last time I felt that same unease gnawing at me. But that was only the beginning. We departed under the cover of night. The convoy was standard, Humvees, tactical vehicles, and our Blackhawks overhead providing air cover. No different from any other mission we'd run. The chatter over comms was light. We were all trying to keep things casual, as we usually do before heading into a mission. The banter between the guys was as normal as ever. "Think we'll get a hot meal at the base?" That was Miller. He always had something to say, no matter how serious things were. "Maybe they've got a buffet," joked Reynolds. "Might even get a steak." The rest of us chuckled. Standard procedure, you know? We were just a group of soldiers doing what we'd been trained to do: infiltrate, gather intel, and get out. Routine. Nothing to worry about. Just another day in the life. At least, that's what we kept telling ourselves. We hit the drop zone before dawn. The insertion was clean, quiet. We set up a small perimeter, unloaded the gear, and began our march towards the target. The weather was freezing, typical for Alaska, but it wasn't anything we couldn't handle. But as we moved, I started to feel it, the oddness creeping in. At first it was just little things. Our radios started glitching, static that shouldn't have been there. I shrugged it off, checked the equipment, standard stuff, but the glitches kept coming. Then, as we moved deeper into the wilderness, I began to notice the silence. We passed through a small village on the outskirts of the facility. Not a soul in sight. It's not uncommon to see villages emptying out during the winter months, but this was different. There was no sign of life at all. No lights in the windows, no movement. The wind picked up, but I stopped for a moment, scanning the area. Something felt off. Usually villages like this would have at least a couple of locals left behind, people who couldn't leave or didn't want to. But there was nothing. No tracks, no vehicles, not even animals. The place felt abandoned, like it had been emptied out in a hurry. The others didn't seem to notice at first. We kept moving, getting closer to the facility. But then, as we continued on, the absence of animals started to hit me. No birds, no wildlife. In a place like this, even in the dead of winter, you'd expect to see something, a deer, a squirrel, anything. But there was nothing, just the sound of our boots crunching in the snow. And the locals? When we passed through the village, some of them were watching us from their windows. But they didn't wave, and didn't approach us. They just stared. And I swear to God, it wasn't curiosity, it was fear. I could see it in their eyes. I asked one of the team leaders about it later. He said I was overthinking it. Maybe it was just the cold or the isolation playing tricks on me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, and that something wasn't right. That's when we reached the site and everything changed. We reached the perimeter of the facility just as the last light of the day began to fade. The place was as quiet as it had been during the briefing, but now it was different. There was no wind, no hum of distant machinery, nothing. Just the sound of our boots crunching in the snow. Every footstep felt louder than the last, like the air itself was absorbing all other noise. I stopped for a moment to scan the area through my optics. The building stood tall and silent, covered in frost like it had been left untouched for years. But it didn't feel abandoned, it felt preserved, like something was waiting for us to show up. It was then I noticed the footprints. At first I thought it was nothing, just our tracks leading up to the site, or maybe the wildlife that had long since vacated the area. But as I bent down to take a closer look, the shape of the prints caught me off guard. They weren't human. Not exactly. Too wide, too deep in the snow. The imprint of something heavy, and the way the snow around them had settled, too precise, too deliberate. And there was something off about the way they looked. They didn't seem to match the landscape, like they didn't belong there. I radioed in to the rest of the team. Everyone seemed to ignore the feeling, chalking it up to the cold or the stress. But I wasn't convinced. We pushed forward, our boots crunching louder as we closed the distance. The building looked like something out of a time capsule, with frozen windows and an air of stagnation about it. But when I tried to check my equipment, just a routine scan, I noticed interference. The signal wasn't just weak, it was distorted too, flickering in and out. Even the GPS was failing us. The readings didn't make sense. According to our coordinates, we should have been standing right at the base's entrance, but the area didn't match anything we had on the maps. I shook it off. Maybe the cold was messing with my head, but there was something else. The air felt different, colder than it should have been. We were high up in the mountains, sure, but the chill in the air wasn't natural. It cut straight through you, like a wet slap on the skin, sinking deep into your bones, as if the building itself was pulling the warmth out of the world around it. Then, we reached the door. It was old, the wood warped from years of neglect, but still solid. When we finally pried it open, the smell hit us, that metallic, coppery scent, something ID only ever smelled on a battlefield. Blood. But it wasn't fresh. It was old, stale, like it had soaked into the very walls. Inside, the darkness swallowed us whole. The air in the corridor was thick, almost viscous, like it hadn't moved in years. But there was something else, something I couldn't place. Old symbols carved into the walls. They weren't military markings. I'd seen enough symbols to recognize the difference, but these? They were wrong. They looked ancient, like something you'd see in an archaeological dig, but they didn't belong in a place like this. And then there were the bones. Small human bones scattered in the corner of the hallway, partially covered by a thin layer of dust. Not many, just enough to make you wonder why they were there. The silence was unnerving. There was no buzzing of lights, no hum of distant machinery, not even the usual creaks of an old building settling. The place felt dead. I didn't say anything to the others, but I could feel it, a low sense of dread crawling up my spine. We were being watched. We had no idea what, but I could feel it. But that was just the beginning. The tension had been building since we first stepped into that damn place. But we kept moving forward, telling ourselves that it was just the cold, the isolation, or maybe just nerves getting to us. We were soldiers after all. We had a job to do, and we were trained to handle anything that came our way. But then something changed. It wasn't obvious at first, just a faint shift in the air, a strange, almost imperceptible hum in the background, like an electrical buzz you can't quite track down. I thought it was just my mind playing tricks, the kind of thing that happens when you're in a place that's so far from civilization. But the others started to notice it too. Reynolds, who was walking, was the first to stop. He turned to us, confusion written all over his face. "Did anyone hear that?" he asked. "What?" I asked, scanning the perimeter. I didn't hear anything but the crunch of our boots and the wind howling through the broken windows. "I swear." "Something just moved," Reynolds said, his voice low. He gestured toward the far hallway. I saw a shadow, just a flicker of it. We all froze. No one spoke. Everyone just stood there for a moment listening. But there was nothing. Just the wind and that hum. It was all too quiet, too still. Then, the radios went dead. All at once, just nothing. The static was loud at first, then silent. It wasn't like when equipment failed before. This was different. "Check your gear," I said, snapping out of my momentary stupor. I checked my own radio, then looked around at the others. Miller and Reynolds were staring at their equipment, clearly just as confused as I was. They tried calling in, but all we heard was white noise, nothing coming back from command. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Something was wrong, something was off. But we kept moving, our objective still clear in our minds. We had to find out what had happened to the facility. We had to complete the mission. That's when the interpreter, the civilian contractor who had been working with us, started to panic. I had only talked to him a few times before, but now he was acting like he'd seen a ghost. He looked around wildly, like he was trying to follow something with his eyes. His hands were trembling as he gripped his radio. "We need to leave," he said, his voice shaking. "Now." We tried to calm him down. "It's just nerves," I told him. "Get it together." But he wasn't listening. He looked directly at me, his eyes wide with fear. "You don't understand. You don't understand what's out here. I've heard the stories. I didn't think they were real, but now I know." He started backing away, his eyes darting around the room. "What stories?" I asked, my patience thinning. He didn't respond. He just kept whispering to himself. I caught a few words. "Not supposed to be here. It's watching us. It will never let us go." He turned and ran. Just like that, without any warning. We shouted after him, but he was already gone, sprinting down the dark corridor toward the exit, his footsteps echoing, faster and faster. Then came the real shock. A sound, a loud, guttural growl, so deep I felt it reverberate in my chest. It came from the hallway, the same one Reynolds had seen the shadow in. We all turned toward it. My heart stopped. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw something. It wasn't human. It was wrong. The shape flickered in and out of existence, like a shadow trying to take form, but it wasn't solid. It moved faster than anything I'd ever seen. One moment it was there, then it was gone, only to reappear at the edge of my vision. I blinked, trying to focus, but it was like it was moving through the walls. Reynolds let out a sharp breath, his voice cracking. "Did you see that?" he whispered. "Move," I barked, but the words felt hollow even as I said them. There was no escaping whatever that was. And then, just like that, the lights flickered. The air turned colder. I saw my breath, misting in front of me, and for the briefest second, I felt like we weren't alone. Not just in the room, but in the entire facility. The building, it was alive. It was watching us, and it didn't want us there. The panic set in fast. We didn't know what we were dealing with, but it was clear. This wasn't just a military operation anymore. This was something else, something we weren't prepared for. But that was just the beginning. An air had gone still again, too still. The hum that had been bothering us was gone, replaced by an oppressive silence that smothered everything. The only sound now was our breathing, ragged in the cold, and the creaking of the old building settling around us. I had never felt more vulnerable. The shadow, whatever the hell it was still out there. We didn't know what we were up against. None of us were prepared for this. But as we pressed on, the tension in the air grew heavier, and I could feel my muscles tense in anticipation. Something was coming. Then, the lights flickered. For a split second, everything went black. The kind of darkness that swallows you whole, leaving you blind, disoriented. And when the lights came back on, it wasn't the same. I swear to you, there was something different about the room. It was colder. The walls, they seemed to move, like the space itself was warping, bending. At first, I thought it was just my mind, but the others felt it too. They started to back away, weapons raised, scanning every corner, every doorway. And then, it came. A low growl filled the air, deep, guttural, vibrating through the walls like it was coming from the very ground beneath us. It wasn't human, and it wasn't animal. It was something older, something predatory. I turned toward the sound, and I saw it. It, standing in the doorway at the far end of the hall. It wasn't like anything I had ever seen before. It was massive, its form constantly shifting, flickering in and out of focus like it couldn't hold itself together. Its shape was wrong, like it was being torn apart and put back together again in an endless loop. At first I couldn't make out any distinct features, but then I saw its eyes, if you could call them that. There were two dark, empty pits where its eyes should have been, like holes carved into the fabric of reality itself, and from them I could feel something, cold, like it was draining the warmth from my very soul. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I couldn't breathe. "Fall back," I shouted, grabbing Miller by the arm, but before I could move, it struck. The floor beneath us cracked open, and something, I don't even know what to call it, reached up and grabbed Miller. His scream was cut off in an instant, like he was snatched away by a force stronger than anything I had ever known. I fired blindly into the darkness, but the rounds didn't seem to matter. They passed right through the thing, like it wasn't even there. There was no recoil, no impact, just endless emptiness. Reynolds shot next, a burst of 3 rounds that didn't even slow the creature. It surged forward, faster than any of us could react. The sound of its movement was unnatural, like something sliding through mud, but the force behind it was enough to throw Reynolds to the floor. He hit the ground hard, his weapon slipping from his hands as he gasped for air. The entity was on him in an instant. I could hear the wet tearing sound as it dragged him across the floor, but it wasn't like it was physically pulling him. It was pulling him through the air. His body moved, bent unnaturally, like the air itself was twisting around him. The screams, I can't get the screams out of my head. I was frozen for a split second, my mind trying to process what I was seeing. But then the feeling of being watched, the cold presence pressing down on me, was unbearable. The thing didn't just want us to see it, it wanted us to feel it, to experience its power. I turned and fired again, a full mag this time, but nothing. No sound of impact, no recoil from my rifle. It was like I wasn't even there. And then, something broke. The world around us cracked, and the shadows deepened. The walls seemed to stretch, and the air itself distorted. We weren't fighting a creature anymore. We were fighting something else, something that didn't belong. This wasn't a mission. It was a trap. The temperature dropped even more. The air was thin, like we were suffocating, and every breath I took burned. But the worst part was the smell. It wasn't just the coppery scent of blood anymore. It was something worse, like decay, like the world itself was rotting. I grabbed Johnson, pulling him toward the exit, but he was shaking, his rifle hanging uselessly by his side. He couldn't see. It couldn't feel it, not like I did. The thing in the hallway was laughing now, not with a mouth, not with anything human. It just laughed, a deep, awful sound that echoed off the walls. "Run!" I screamed, and we turned to flee. But the walls closed in, the space itself shrinking around us. And that's when everything changed. We didn't have a plan anymore. All we had was fear and the instinct to survive. The moment the thing attacked, everything we'd been trained for, every tactic, every mission, became meaningless. We turned to run, but every step felt like moving through molasses. The air was thick, pressing against us, making it harder to breathe and think. Reynolds was gone and vanished without a trace. Miller was beside me, pale and terrified. We had to get out, warn command, but the radios were dead, static buzzing like the creature itself had short-circuited them. Then, another scream. Johnson was dragged backward into the shadows, his eyes wide in terror. I couldn't help him. He disappeared into the dark, leaving nothing but silence in his wake. I fired blindly into the dark, just hoping for some kind of chance, some hope that the rounds would make contact, but nothing worked. No matter how many rounds I sent into that space, the thing just kept coming, kept pulling us apart. Finally, we reached the exit. We ran, and we didn't stop until we hit the extraction point. But by then, the damage had already been done. I'll never forget the look on Colonel Hayes' face. He didn't say a word at first, just looked at me like he was waiting for an answer that I couldn't give. I tried to explain the creature, the shadows, the screams, but he didn't want to hear it. The official report was simple. Contact lost with facility. No enemy contact. Extraction complete. Personnel accounted for. It was like they didn't even believe us. That's when I knew. The mission was classified beyond anything ID ever experienced. It wasn't just about us getting out of there. It was about making sure the truth stayed buried. There were no follow-up questions, no investigation. The incident never made it past the sealed files. We were sent back to base like nothing had happened. No debriefing, no trauma counseling, just orders to keep quiet. Everyone who survived was told the same thing: keep your mouth shut. And the strangest part? I haven't heard from anyone who was there since. No one talks about it. Not a word. Like we never existed in that place. But what happened next took things to another level. I've been living with this ever since. Nights full of waking nightmares, flashes of what I saw. The others? I don't know what happened to them. Some of them disappeared off the grid. Some are still out there, but I don't hear from them anymore. You think that's normal? I don't, and neither should you. We were sent to find answers, but the truth is something we were never meant to know, something we're not supposed to remember. I thought I could outrun it, but I'm starting to wonder if it's following me, watching me. I hear it in the dark sometimes, in the stillness. If you're smart, you'll forget this story. If this video disappears, you'll know why. And if you ever find yourself near that place, remember, some things are better left alone.